Hey.
Okay, where is, oh yeah, I can see right there. It says polls.
Okay.
There I am. I'm looking for something on my other phone.
All right.
Everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you all today?
Good.
We're good. We're good.
There.
How are you? Are you cold or are you warm up there?
I heard some melting today, so I bet we hit the 30s, but it's always a little warmer by the lake than it is away from
Oh,
it.
is that Clinton? Is that?
Yeah. Hi,
Okay.
yes, Clinton.
Good. All right. So we make you
We make you a co-host and a
co-host. Maybe you want to rename yourself just so.
Well, that's okay. No, that's fine.
Well, so I mean, people know you're Clinton. I mean,
I
otherwise.
mean, I'll do an intro at the beginning if that makes any difference.
let's see now.
I don't know if you can add more co-hosts. So I think you have to.
No, you can add co-host.
I should be able to. I have a little share screen deal on the bottom if you've added me already.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can test that too.
Yeah. I don't think he's co-host. No, he's not.
You try it. I don't know that you are.
All right, let me see what happens. No, I would have to be a co-host.
Yeah.
I don't think you can because I think you can only have maybe two.
No.
No? Okay.
I thought. You know, we could.
Let's see. Let me.
You know, maybe you need to, Glenn. Maybe you need to make him the co-host.
Yeah, let me see.
Maybe I can't do it. I don't think I can as co-host. I don't think I can do that. I think you have to do it.
Okay, you should be a co-host now.
All right,
Yeah.
let me see.
Yeah,
Oh, yes, I
it
can share
shows
screen.
now. There's a little icon that shows
Yeah.
next to the name.
I'm a co-host, so I can't make you. So that's perfect.
Okay.
Glenn's the guy.
Doug?
Okay.
No.
There's the polls.
Okay.
I just want to make sure it's still visible.
So, yeah, I'll have to see if my friend Roger comes on here, Clinton. Good old Sven, you know, if he.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You go down to his place and fish and stuff. So it's he's a great fisherman.
So the recording, just so you know, the recording is on. So it'll be on for the whole time, starting at the very start.
Excellent.
So I got out and cross country skied about 2.5 miles today, so it was good.
Woo!
Good, Glenn.
Nice.
I was getting hot actually.
Yeah.
But, oh, where did I put? There we go.
How much snow have you got, Clinton? Is it?
I think we probably still have a pretty solid 1.5 feet.
Okay.
Maybe a little more. The last couple of snowfalls were a little south of us, so we got the wind, but we didn't get any of the precipitation.
Okay.
So we still got a long ways to go for the most part, but yeah, it's pretty nice. It was for the longest time. I mean, our Christmas count, even that long, that far away, hardly had much snow. I mean, we had maybe half of that, maybe less than half of that, which made it pretty interesting. We had a good showing of things that we've seen once or twice just because of how mild it was.
Yeah. Nice.
So, yeah, but it certainly made up for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Clinton, are the owls starting to do their mating calls and everything?
Yeah, I mean, great horns certainly are.
Okay.
they're always the earliest anywhere you go. Locally, like so in our neighborhood here, during the Christmas count, I got like 4 or 5 during count week. Different ones. People would say, "Oh, I had one over here. I had one over here." Count day, we only ended up with 2, but that's better than 0. But yeah, January is when they start. Pretty reliably.
Yeah.
Everybody else waits till March, but great horns are already thinking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, is
Yeah, and
February?
we'll cover that a little bit too.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Good.
About it's part of all of the different things that we're doing, but yeah, we'll definitely touch on that again for sure.
Oh, okay, good.
We could hear them like in our yard last night, and sure enough, I opened up the window, and all of a sudden I saw one fly over the house. Cool. But that's really all we had. I mean, there is a few screech owls around here, a few barred owls, but really common is the great horn.
Yeah. Have you noticed an uptick in great horns this year, or maybe just the fall winter?
Just
season?
usual.
Okay. Yeah.
I grew up in southern Minnesota, and I have a friend who is a professor down at a town just close to where I grew up, and he sort of has been keeping track of phenology generally, but he was noting that great horn numbers are up. And that usually means barred owl numbers are down. So when our cottontail numbers go up in the southern part of the state, great horns go up, and the barred owls leave because the great horns kick them all out. Then the cottontails will relax, and then the barred owls will come back in, and the great horns will leave. So it's always interesting, especially as the last couple of winters haven't been very hard on mammals, especially. It's always cool to see that get reflected in the predators. We see that with, snowshoe hares and bobcats and snowshoe hares and goshawks and all that stuff up here, but it's always cool to see it in other parts of the world too.
There's a brant goose that was up in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. We went up there and saw it, and that was really cool. And then it came down to Waukegan Beach near us here.
Yeah,
but I don't think it could find much grass or anything to eat, so it went on down to Montrose, which is near, closer into Chicago.
Yeah, totally.
So
cool. Did they think that's one bird then? Because I know for a while they thought there might have been 2.
We only saw one.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's just one, because the one that was in Manitowoc is now gone, so it's probably
the one that's
the exact same time they'd seen it every day in Manitowoc, and then all of a sudden they saw it here. And then,
first. Well, then you better wait a minute then.
You clean dishes as you cook to save time and stay out of the mess. But
turn off this light behind me here.
So anybody seeing any interesting things around Lake County?
Most of these people are muted, so
okay.
they can give us.
I got an email from someone who saw a towhee over at by the Volo Bog, I think it was.
That's not pretty cool.
It's not the season for them.
No,
yeah.
Not that early. Burned.
I guess those bald eagles are hanging out still at Lake Manier. Of course, for Clinton, that's like every day robin or something, or every.
Yeah. Our Christmas count had a record of bald eagles this year, so it was pretty nice.
But part of that towhee story is I suggested the woman report it to the Christmas bird count. I had forgotten the deadline was tomorrow. And when I went to go on, I went online and found the site for it. And it was the map of the U.S. with all those red, yellow, and green circles.
Where are you?
And I was just unable to find where to tell her to report.
Yeah.
Any suggestions?
I don't know, or I just tell people to post to eBird, because that's easy for everyone, and that data is
Right.
pretty useful.
Yeah, that's so yeah, one of the reasons well, we have to look for the great horned owls more, but some of the platforms are gone from the forest preserve, and we're not getting allowed to refix them. So but of course there's other natural opportunities to be nesting. So but Clinton, we have the thing about bald eagles. We have the with the rivers here,
Mhm.
The Fox River, and then of course the Mississippi. If you keep going, there's dams there which attract the eagles fishing.
Sure.
So it's kind of fun.
And the harbors attract a lot of them too.
And the
So,
harbor-
I mean, once it starts really freezing up, you'll start seeing them
Yeah.
really coming into the harbors on Lake Michigan.
Sure.
Okay.
Totally.
So, and it does not freeze solid in the lake yet. I mean, it's been so warm this year. So it's.
Yeah, the estuary just sort of tried to get covered in ice a little last week, and but Big Lake is still open, pretty much all the way up the shore.
Right.
Although yesterday we saw our first ice fisherman, and I'm like, it is not frozen. I can't believe you're out there on the lake. I mean,
Where was
It's really a surprise how early folks get out. Boy. Ooh.
at Lake Catherine yesterday, we were just driving by there, and I saw at Lake Catherine there near the tollway, there was like 3 parties of ice fishermen out there. So
Wow.
it's pretty shaky, if you ask me.
Totally.
Yeah, ice fishermen are brave people a lot of times. I remember heading up to Lapham Peak in Delafield to train for the Berkey, and it was 5 below zero or something. And my friend Roger and I looked, and there was a ice fisherman on the way up, right up Milwaukee Avenue. And we said, well, we're brave, but that's a real man there. Sitting out there. Oh, not fun. But so I am going to, let's see, what time is it? Oh, 6:53. I'm going to click on my screen at 7 o'clock on my share screen.
Okay.
And just run through a couple of things there, and then we'll do that. We'll do that poll right after I'm done. Doug, and then I'll introduce you, Clinton, and it's all yours.
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So we're getting a lot of people in.
They did a traditional bonus.
Let's see. Yep. Good to see. Well, Clinton, we moved to Zoom. We haven't had one live meeting. We've had Birdwalks, but not one live meeting this year.
Sure.
And of course, it's good and bad. It's because we can bring people like you in.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So were you, when you were born, were you in Duluth? Or up
No, I grew up in southern Minnesota. So my hometown is like 20 miles north of Iowa, is where I grew up, in a little town just south of Mankato.
okay.
So I've been in Duluth for, boy, probably 7 years, almost 8 years now. Came up for my master's, and have been here since.
Good, yeah.
Oh, I'm from Northfield, Minnesota, so
Sure. Yeah.
I know where you're talking about.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So we may get up to Sax-Zim Bog maybe later this winter. We'll see,
Sure.
depending on weather and COVID and all that stuff.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I'll sort of at the end have a little bit on a little like recommendations piece. Just,
Okay.
you know, we'll cover a whole bunch of different stuff
Good.
here, but I'll certainly mention that for folks who are thinking about coming up or interested in coming up or, you know, need help deciding when to come up, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, Shar, when I start, or you and Doug, you can keep admitting people, okay?
Sure.
When I,
Are we in the upper left?
and for those who are not hearing us, well, they are hearing us. We are recording this, so if you want to go back and watch it again, you'll be able to do that by going to the website, the Audubon website.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm hitting buttons. That's why I'm not paying attention to it.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah, they're coming.
It's always fun to watch the sort of 3 to 5 minute rush of folks getting at it.
Well, sometimes we move a little slower and we have a rush afterward.
Totally, yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
I know, I can't quite.
With the talks I've done, we pretty much, you know, right about.
Well,
you
I'm a
know,
little bit further away than
start
if
of-
I get up here, but then I don't want to do that when I'm.
After you get going,
I thought
yeah,
your vision
5
was
more
better.
people.
Yeah, I think it's the low
all right.
light. I have a little trouble.
I think I'm gonna go to that page to start or to share. Oops.
You got 2 people in your
Okay, so I will have a difficulty admitting why this is,
Yep. We'll keep it going.
but what do we got? Official
Just admit.
time 6:58, so we're getting there. And,
Yeah. What the heck?
Yeah.
Let's do it. So I'm like, God bless.
yeah. Feel like I'm starting a race. I get down there. 5, 4, no, I don't have to be that exact, but. We'll wait for the 5 people, 4 people.
Pretty good.
Yeah. I think my little thing got several.
Oh, he bounced back.
Yeah, little.
Yes, it is 7 o'clock.
There we go.
Times are going up. I'll wait for these 5 people to be admitted. 4, 3. Yes. Oh, I I guess I will start, even though we have people coming in, but
Yep.
we want to welcome everyone for a new year, 2021. So it's wonderful that, and we hope that people have gotten through the holidays safely, and we'll continue to get outside. It's a great time to be walking and exploring and looking for birds, and just hiking and being safe outside seems to be the way to go. And I will hit my button here, and we'll blast off. Let's see.
I have to mind
We'll
that
be starting
that's
here,
cool.
and
without video.
You should see the
it took me
sky.
a long time to find those and figure them out, but and then our bird has
Forward
come
to
back,
year for
and he's ready for us. So the next slide is Doug took and with Shar just the other day, so I thought I would show it because it's kind of an unusual bird to see. And that's the evening grosbeak that they saw in Milwaukee. Which day was that, Doug? Was that about 3 days ago? 4 days?
Yeah,
Yeah, just a couple days ago.
yeah, 2 days ago. Yeah.
Yep.
A female grosbeak. So I don't have a lot of announcements. The announcement would be, a big one is, if you are not getting emails, be sure to sign up for emails if you have the capability. And I assume you probably do if you're on a Zoom meeting. And then you will get probably at least once, probably twice a month, updates of what's coming. Birdwalks will be announced for registration. Meetings will be announced, and anything
down to the
else that
bottom.
comes
I
up, we
cannot
will
do
be putting out there.
I'm
And
not going to do it.
we are going to do a poll. One of the
Why don't you
polls.
start it? Why don't you start that?
Shar, you're
Just don't emit them
Maybe
anymore.
only one of us should use audio.
Shar, you're not muted, so I just want to let you know you're coming through.
Mute all. Click mute all.
Well, I don't want to mute all because then
Well, then you just
everybody's muted.
unmute. Okay. Hit the poll.
Okay. So the
Yeah.
when we do this, we will have a poll of different ways people are receiving information, which we're very interested
It's
in.
launch. You got to hit launch.
Committee is-
It's in polling, dear.
Oh,
People need to turn off their volume.
okay.
Sorry, we can't hear. There's too much background noise.
Yeah, Doug and Shar, I think you're still on
You
not
gotta,
on.
gotta show it.
Okay. Anyway, so the
You gotta make it full screen.
we'll
Could you
continue to
in
have some
meeting people?
walks, and
This is the results, dear.
God, would you just
All right.
turn it off?
I'm gonna go to
Are you going to mute yours, or am I going to mute mine?
Clinton first, and then we'll go to the
I
poll.
hear it coming out of your.
Yeah, who's on there? Somebody's got a double thing going, 2 computers, and that's why it's echoing. We want to welcome Clinton from
You mute yours?
wildlife area up in Minnesota, who's a naturalist, a teacher, running citizen scientists, and teaching citizen scientists, which a lot of us do.
Not
down
on audio.
here.
Just
And we want to welcome you, and we're so glad you were able to sign on with us. And I know
Okay, people, come on.
you're going to be in Indiana doing this real soon also.
Yeah.
And doing some other ones. So we're glad we got you when we could. And so Doug, do you want to do that? Do the 2 things, and then we'll go right to Clinton.
Perfect.
I think we have to share our screen.
Glenn, you have the ability to mute everyone but the speaker. Why don't you do that?
Yeah, let me.
Okay, why don't you want to end polling? Guys, do you want to finish the polling? We have 43 of 84 people have voted.
Oh, you already did that. Okay.
Yeah, people are in the process of voting. We're going to give you 1 more minute to vote. Okay, so far 44 of 84. We got half the people have answered, but we still got just at the bottom of your screen. Are you guys all seeing the polling?
I'm not even seeing that. So let's see.
Okay. We're seeing people come in. We're up to 51, 52. Are you guys seeing that on your screen, everyone?
No,
No, we're not.
but maybe that's because they've already taken the poll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Now I see it. Yeah.
No, I know that. Yeah, why not? I think when you hit in polling, it shows. It does. Okay, I think we're going to end now. We've got about 3/4 of people have finished. Okay.
Okay.
And we're going to share the results right now. Are you guys all seeing the results? It looks like, hey, that's good. The majority of people saw at least 7 birds in their yard today or in their neighborhood. And it looks like most people are getting their news from the email update. That's 68% of people. So thanks for participating. It's really helpful for us to learn more about what people, and we're going to probably continue this while we're doing Zoom because it helps us do a quick survey and understand what people's needs and interests are. Okay, so with that, I think we can turn it over to Clinton.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody. I'm gonna share my screen here, and we will get this going. So, thanks again, everybody. I'm super excited to be able to sort of give a talk in a different capacity and sort of a virtual capacity, which is always kind of a nice thing to cover some ground and interact with some different groups. So my name is Clinton Dexter-Nienhaus. I am the head naturalist here with the Friends of Sax-Zim Bog. And what we're sort of going to cover is a little bit of everything. It's a big place, as you'll see, and there's a lot of different ways we can talk about it. But I'll sort of work through the seasons. I think one of the best ways to experience a place or to sort of explore and be in a region is to sort of see what happens all year round. So that's sort of what we're going to do. We're going to start right at the beginning with the organization and the place. Perhaps it's a name you might have heard before, the Friends of Sax-Zim Bog, or just the Sax-Zim Bog. Perhaps it's not. Maybe it's a totally brand new thing for you. So we'll cover a little bit about that. And then we'll work in the season starting where we are now with the winter. It also coincidentally is typically one of our busiest seasons. And we'll get into why. From the winter, of course, we'll transition into spring with when birds are arriving and who's showing up and what other things are happening in the spring. Spend a little bit of time on the summer. Summer is one of my favorite times to be in the bog. Maybe not surprising coming from a naturalist that's my favorite time in a place, but we'll talk about why as well. And then we'll end with the fall. We'll sort of come full circle in our journey, all with the hopes that you show up at the right time. You don't end up too early or too late like this great blue heron in all the snow. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. And as we're going, use that chat box, type in questions. We'll take them all at the end. I'm really open to any questions you have about the bog, about me, my background, or any of the things you can imagine from this talk. So what is the Sax-Zim Bog? We'll break right into it. And when I say Sax-Zim Bog, what I'm really talking about is this bigger area. It's the Sax-Zim Bog Important Bird Area. Important bird areas are designated by Audubon Society and BirdLife International on a set of criteria, and they're all over the place. Minnesota has a bunch. There's certainly some across the U.S. as well, and they're designated based on certain criteria, whether that's important or sensitive habitats, migration type habitats. It could be based on the bird life that's present, whether that's species that are rare or locally common. And that's where you might find them, thinking of like terns or something that nest really locally but may not be a part of the landscape, or areas that have conservation need, whether the species or the landforms or what have you needs some conservation. And so for us, the Sax-Zim bog is 147,000 acres in that designation. And as an organization, as the Friends of Sax-Zim Bog, we like to broaden that scope a little bit. We like to include somewhere around 250 to 300,000 acres, because for us as an organization, and as well as the critters that are in this area, habitat connectivity is really important. So whether or not a piece of bog is within a boundary, it's still going to be important, and it's still something we should include in our scope and the things that we try to do as an organization, because there are things outside of the limits of the IBA. And so if we look at that on a map, you see Duluth down there in the bottom right. That orange boundary, that is the Sax-Zim Bog Important Bird Area. That's the 147,000 acres. Sort of that northwest corner, though, that northwest third is about all that folks ever see or ever bird. On our birding map, that's what's included, just that little square. And then if we zoom out a bit and we look at that greater Sax-Zim Bog area, this is what we're including. We're including all this extra stuff on the west side. There's a few pockets on the north end, and then there's a little bit east of Highway 53 as well. Because again, all those habitats are really important and something that we need to pay attention to, looking for birds or thinking about just shared habitat. The name often gets brought up. Bog maybe is self-explanatory. If you want to talk bogs, we can certainly talk bogs, but that habitat type is part of the name. And so are these two things, the towns of Sax and Zim. So if you ever wondered where that name comes from, it comes from these two towns. They don't exist really anymore. You can still see them on maps, but outside of that, there's no buildings or collection of houses or anything that really notify you that, oh, there's a town here. They were both old historic railroad towns. You can certainly find people that are alive today that grew up in these places that do remember them as something other than just a little dot on a map. One of our board members, Gene, he actually grew up in Zim. So he grew up right at the intersection of Zim Road and McDavitt Road, which is pretty cool. And as an organization, we are a nonprofit. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. And you can see the mission there. We hope to support, promote, and protect the Sax-Zim Bog IBA through land preservation, education, research, and communication. And the organization isn't very old. You can see 2010 is when the organization began. Sparky and Dave and Kim, all birders in the area. Sparky's our executive director now. They were noticing sort of increases in logging, especially black spruce and tamarack. That's sort of this major tree component of a bog and of the area, which is why we have a lot of the species we have. And so they decided to start an organization to sort of serve as a land preservation organization to find these properties and buy them up potentially before they could get logged or somebody else would buy them for something else, because supporting that habitat is really important. And this is everybody, believe it or not. We're not a very big organization. I'm there on the far left. Next to me is Sarah Beester. She is our development director. And then Sparky is on the far right. Those are the three of us are more or less the full-time staff. I'm full-time in my position. I think Sparky and Sarah are basically full-time. And then everybody else you see plus Gene, who's taking the picture, are the board. And that's it. Really, we add a few more folks in the wintertime. We have 3 to 4 staff that we'll hire on during the winter as Welcome Center staff. But this year, of course, is different. The Welcome Center is not open. We still have those folks on board as staff, just in a totally different way than we would have it in the past. And like I said, land preservation really is the goal of the organization. Certainly outreach and research and those things are important as well. And so far we've been able to preserve about 500 acres, which is really, really great. Always working on more land acquisitions and the like. And you can kind of see our properties these are our 8 properties within that greater 147,000 acre landscape. And you may notice something: bog, 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 woods. One of these things is not like the other, right? And that's sort of a good thing. Most of the land preservation we try to do is related to bogs and habitat for boreal species. But there is important habitat that might not be bog in the area. And so Wood Thrush Woods is our newest property. It's 41 acres of sort of mixed riverine forest, which is a really interesting habitat type to have in a bog, and is pretty valuable for that distinction, that it is different, that it is something that holds some really cool things. Obviously wood thrushes, as the name suggests, we'll talk about them in a little bit, but that's what we hope to do as an organization. And we can do that through the help of volunteers. We can do it through members. Volunteers do a heck of a lot for us and with us. Our board is all volunteer. Welcome Center hosts, so folks who are working alongside our staff in the Welcome Center, helping out with the easy, answer questions or fill bird feeders, something like that. But they are really helpful. Some of the days, if we have a really busy day at the Welcome Center, having a couple extra hands is really helpful. In the summertime, of course, kestrel monitors. I run the kestrel monitoring program we have in the bog. Happy to answer questions about that if you have it. But we had 4 to 5 folks who help volunteer with that as well. And then I put citizen scientists on the end there. That's really referring to folks who aren't necessarily associated with us as an organization, but the folks who are out there using eBird or using iNaturalist or Bug Guide or submitting observations to Odonata Central or Butterflies and Moths in North America. Those folks who are out and consistently putting in effort so we can sort of help have a better understanding of the biodiversity of the area. And to do all of this, of course, we need help financially, right? Our members do a whole lot, whether that's through donations or becoming volunteers or putting out our name to folks they might know. Our members make it all possible. We're not traditionally a membership organization like you might think of, you get something in the mail that has 3 levels of membership. We really include anyone who's donated $25 or more in a year of member. That's a pretty easy little distinction. We call those folks bog buddies. And generally speaking, there might be 700 to 800 folks in a year that are up to date. We have a list, I think, of about 1,500 folks or so that we would include as members, whether or not they're up to date in donations, but that's totally all right. And those folks, again, are super, super valuable, super important to us because of all that they do. Whether that's attending our fundraising galas, this is an image from one of our galas, or if you can see the slide within the slide, that's Tim and Judy Walker. They are a couple of our members and really awesome, amazing supporters. They had the initial purchase of Winterberry Bog for us, which is one of our 40-acre properties that they just sort of bought for us, donated back to us, and it's been a really wonderful place to see some cool things. So again, without folks, even to attend something like a fundraising gala, it's really invaluable. And we certainly have more than just birds in the Sax-Zim bog. As a naturalist, I can talk to you about the birds, but I'll talk to you about everything else too. We've documented just over 2,400 species so far. That could be trees, shrubs, sedges, dragonflies, butterflies, orchids, whatever you want. We've probably documented at least a representative of that group, which is pretty cool. As head naturalist, I'm also doing education and outreach. So in all seasons too, not just the winter and the summer, really all year long, which is really great. Most of that education comes in the form of larger, longer field trips. So think 3 to 4 hours or more. And then through events like our BioBlitz and different things like that. If you have a Master Naturalist program in Illinois, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but in Minnesota we do. And I teach some classes through Master Nats as well. Happy to answer questions if you have those about a Master Naturalist program. Of course, there's recreation, right? Birding and botanizing, canoeing and kayaking and snowshoeing and skiing. All of these things happen in this area. We might not facilitate it all as an organization, but it certainly is something you can do when you're here. So there's really something for anybody and everybody. Like I said, our winter season tends to be our busiest. So we generally have somewhere around 4,400 folks visit during the winter. And that is just folks who come to the Welcome Center and get physically counted by folks at the Welcome Center. So there's certainly more than that. And then the summer, there's usually less. Summer is not a very busy time necessarily. It certainly could be and can be, especially with education programs and all of that going on. But the winter is when it all happens. And part of the way we can do that is through having ways folks can get out and recreate in this area. Much of the bird watching that gets done is along the roadsides, but we do have trails in all of our properties. We also have 3 boardwalks. So this is just a quick snapshot of what a boardwalk might look like in the bog. This runs through a pretty wet alder swamp area and sort of leaves you at the beginning of this bog on our fringe gentian bog property. But we do have 3. This one is the smallest at about 200 feet. Warren Nelson Bog's got a boardwalk of about 900 feet. And then our newest boardwalk is at Winterberry Bog, and that is the Bob Russell Memorial Boardwalk. And that is 1,200 feet, and it's a loop. So it's a pretty cool, fancy little boardwalk to help folks of all abilities sort of get in and investigate this place, which is really cool. And as an educator, it's really helpful. If I can take groups like this and get them down and in the mosses and things and understand what's happening in an area, it helps sort of build that conservation ethic in folks. It helps them get a better understanding potentially of the area, especially if they grew up there. We do get a lot of folks who grew up in this stuff, who grew up in the swamps and the bogs of the area that may or may not have a good understanding of what's there. And so as an educator, that's one of my favorite things to do, is get folks who grew up in this stuff to kind of investigate it a little. And all of our properties do have trails, like I mentioned. All of those trails now have some really cool signage because of volunteers. One of our board members and super volunteers, Ruben, had some extra wood from a project this summer and made trail markers. So we have trailheads marked, all the loops are marked, and signage pointing you back to the Welcome Center trailheads. All these trails are pretty rugged. They're not paved, they're not level, certainly. In the summer, they're very wet, but they're certainly a way you can get off trail in all seasons on our properties. So all of that background stuff works to where we're going to cover the seasons. So like I said, we're going to cover from winter to fall, winter being our busy season. And I've sort of given you a timeline. What do I mean by winter? Well, it's sort of a long period for us in northern Minnesota. As you can see, I've sort of generally labeled late November to April as being winter. Of course, April can sometimes feel like spring, but more often than not, it feels like winter still. So our busy season as an organization is mid-December to mid-March. And so I sort of extend a little bit on either side of that, but I'll have a little sort of demarcation as we go. And often you'll see some bog referred to as this. We like to call it the Arctic Riviera. It's a destination for people. It's also a destination for birds. So we do have a lot of boreal forest specialty species, bog breeders and things like that that are here all the time. But we also have a really cool home for those birds that are coming just to winter, birds like shrikes and rough-legged hawks and the like. And so sort of a double use of the name there. And the big bird that most looking for are gray grays. Great gray owl is the #1 target for mostly everybody there. Great thing about great grays is that they're here all the time. So they're a resident bird. And the winter is just when you can see them the easiest, more than likely. I've certainly seen just as many in the months of May and June as I have in February. But winter, it's a lot easier. These birds are coming to the roadsides to forage. A little bit easier for them to forage along the roads than it is back in the woods. So again, a wonderful bird, a bog species, bog specialist, but certainly that's where you find them in our part of the world. We are pretty south for great grays in Minnesota. There are a couple places further south of us yet that have them nesting, but this is really about as far south as you get. But along this cadre of bog species, Boreal Chickadee. They're here all the time. They're another resident species, one that just happens to be a little bit easier in the winter. Boreal Chickadee is a really wonderful bird, and one that I always get worried about some years. They are a species that, like Canada jay, are pretty sensitive to climate. And so the last few years, we haven't been seeing them as regular, which is always a little bit of a worry for me. But they're a species that is pretty skulky generally. That's in their nature. They're not like a black-capped chickadee that's going to come out and land on you. These guys are going to stick back in the woods and sort of wait. They will come into feeders. So we do have the Admiral Road feeding station where these birds come in fairly regularly. There's one right now at Warren Nelson Bog too that found a suet cake that it likes. So it's been coming into a feeder there too. But generally speaking, it's the sort of meat-based products on a feeder, not the seeds. That's what blackcaps are taking. But a wonderful species, again, a resident, a bog specialist, a really cool species. And then I mentioned Canada jays, and I can't do a talk without talking about corvids. I love corvids. And Canada jays for us are here all the time. They're a resident. And they nest really early. So when we think about why Boreal Chickadee and Canada jay might be a little sensitive, Canada jays start nesting in February. So they're sitting on eggs by the middle to the late end of February. And so if you really want to see Canada jays, later you get in the season, the harder it is to find them because they're sitting on eggs already. But when we do have warm spans in February, that's not great. That means their food caches are spoiling. That means they are not potentially going to do as well. So we always look forward to seeing them, and we always hope that they get to do well in a season because they are a wonderful bird that does show very well whenever you're in the bog. But of course, Canada jays might not be as interesting as a bird like a blackback woodpecker. Again, resident nester, black spruce tamarack specialist. One of those birds that a lot of folks come to see, and we usually do have a pretty good population of them in a given year. They move around a little bit. A lot of our northern birds do a lot of moving around in a season, and our woodpeckers certainly aren't immune to that movement. So blackback woodpeckers are a wonderful species. This one's on an aspen, so maybe not its typical black spruce, but certainly a good-looking bird, one that I always love to see. But with all these residents, these birds that people are coming to see in the winter, there are those visitors, birds like northern shrike and rough-legged hawk that are high Arctic breeders that are just coming to winter in the Sax-Zim bog. And part of the research pieces that we do and the citizen science that we do are raptor surveys. Every month, starting in December, we do raptor surveys through Hawk Migration Association of North America. Shrikes are one of those birds we keep track of. And this year, too, there's some research going on with shrikes. We've got Abby Glean, who is banding shrikes this winter just to sort of check on home range size. Where are these birds going during the winter when they're here? Potentially, they might be able to be recaptured further north or during the next winter if they show up in a different spot. So a wonderful species, one that folks definitely look forward to seeing. But birds that I look forward to seeing, of course, the finches. And this year, as you saw at the beginning, it's been a great year for finches in weird spots. For us, pine grosbeak isn't that weird. They're a bird that's here all the time in the wintertime. They don't nest in Minnesota, but they are here pretty much every winter. And I say that because during our Christmas count last year, we missed them. And that was the first time in I think 36 years that we missed pine grosbeak. But they were pretty much absent from all of northern Minnesota. So maybe it wasn't that odd, but I missed them for a whole year, and now we have them all over the place again, which is great. But they sort of give you the thing that you need to think about when visiting in the wintertime if you're interested in finches, and that is sort of this eruptive nature of finches. These really large-scale movements, or the lack of them because they don't have to move. So some years we might have tons of red poles all over the place. 3 or 4 years ago, we probably had 200 to 300 red poles every day at the Welcome Center. And then a couple of years, last year we had maybe 5 or 6. The year before that, we hardly had any. So they do fluctuate quite heavily based on the food up north. But, even if you just see one, they're a great bird to see. Another high Arctic bird, another bird with a really cool suite of adaptations to help them survive these really cold, cool conditions here in the bog. But while we're still talking about finches, of course, we got to talk about crossbills. Crossbills are maybe those the eruptive favorites of a lot of birders. White-winged crossbill for us in the Sax-Zim bog, it tends to be a lot more common than red, mostly because they're a small-billed bird. They have small bills, so they like the small cones on our tamaracks and our black spruce and balsam fir. Whereas red crossbills are a lot larger billed, and they deal with the cones of like white pine and red pine and jack pine, these larger conifers. So in a season, we may just have one or the other. Sometimes we'll have both. Both of them have bred in the area and do breed in the area. The last few years, white-winged crossbills have been nesting, so you can find them in the summer as well. Reds, more sporadic than white-wings. Again, that food base is just not quite there for them in our area, but that's all right. People like to come to visit to see birds, but you can also see really cool things that just blow you away, like hawk owls. Northern hawk owls are one of the cooler birds that we do get as a winter visitor, occasionally as a nester as well. Northern hawk owl does nest in Minnesota, just usually not where we are. Usually further north or in the northwest, but potentially they do nest in the bog. They have before. We've certainly had years where they showed up at weird times, which made us think, well, they might have nested. But generally a bird that you see a lot more of, especially in eruptive years. Same thing with snowy owl. They're a bird that sometimes winters the full winter in the Sax-Zim bog, but we just don't have a lot of habitat for them. So from one year to the next, we may have 1, we might have 0, we might have 5. This year we had 3 for a while, and then a couple of them left, and then one got taken to the Raptor Center yesterday. So, it's just not a lot of great habitat for them here. They like the port down in Duluth or over in Superior, the airports and things. There are some agricultural lands, like you see this one on a hay bale. So there are places for them, but usually come January, February, they might leave, or they might have moved out of the area. And that's all right. But what I was going to transition to are the mammals. Believe it or not, we have a lot of visitors come for mammals during the wintertime, whether that's bobcats, which tend to get a little bit easier in the later part of the season, February and March, when they start thinking about breeding, when they are moving around a heck of a lot, or when we have really high snowshoe hare numbers, we tend to see them a little more reliably. But weasels, short-tailed weasel, and pine martins certainly get seen every single year. We use deer carcasses to feed birds in some places, and both of these weasels take advantage of that. They'll come and they'll find a carcass and they'll sit on it all day and just munch, 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 and then they'll leave and they'll come back pretty reliably. So always something to see on these bird feeding areas, which is pretty cool. And then snowshoe hares. I mentioned snowshoe hares at the beginning when we were talking about goshawks, but snowshoe hares are a part of the landscape. They're here all the time. They're pretty hard to find in the winter, actually. I've only seen a handful of them in the wintertime. You see tons more in the summer. But there are a couple of them that'll like to hang out by the boardwalks. So at Winterberry Bog, or at Warren Nelson Bog and Fringe Gentian Bog, the last couple of years I've had a couple of snowshoe hares hanging out under the boardwalk or around the boardwalk that folks have gotten to see. And that's always a really cool thing because they are pretty hard to find against a white background. And it's busy. This is busy. It's bird busy. It's people busy. And we're doing all kinds of stuff during the wintertime. So this is what sort of a Christmas count wrap up might look like for us. We do have a Christmas count in the Sax-Zim Bog. It is centered around cotton. So it includes areas east of Highway 53. And it is sort of a invite only, if you will, type of a Christmas count. Otherwise, we'd have hundreds of people show up just to hope to see owls and maybe not actually do a bird count. So we get a good group together. Sparky, again, our executive director there on the right, he's been in charge of this count, I think, for the last 35 or 36 years, which is pretty cool to have such a nice long set of data. We have some great claims to fame on our Christmas count. We generally don't see huge numbers of species, but we do see huge numbers of birds sometimes. So our count has the highest number of great gray owls and northern hawk owls ever recorded on a Christmas bird count in the US, which is crazy to think about. That was in the eruption, the owl eruption in 2004 and 2005, where we had hundreds of great grays in Minnesota in areas they weren't really supposed to be. They all moved down south from Canada for the winter because there was a food shortage. As all eruptions happen, that's sort of the same theme. No food, so you move. Same thing with hawk owls, which is really cool. For birders, maybe not so cool for the birds. It's a hard time for them, but we certainly get to enjoy them. We also have a bird-a-thon that goes on during the winter. Actually, it starts this Friday, so the 8th of January. We sort of tout it as the coldest bird-a-thon in the US, which is maybe true. I think most years it probably is. We've certainly done them in the 30 to 40 below range. The last couple of years, it's been a little milder, but it's just a fun little fundraiser that we do during the wintertime, help break up that sort of monotony of the winter up here. It gets done in a few different ways. We have the traditional sort of people driving around, walking around, listening and looking for birds. But we also have a wintergreen division is what we call it, where we have folks that are going out on bikes, fat tire bikes, or country skis, person-powered means to see birds too. Last year, I think most of the teams were in the wintergreen division, which is pretty cool. A really fun way to interact with the winter outside of snowshoeing or skiing. Our fundraising gala typically is in January as well. This year, we're not doing a fundraising gala in person, and we're only keeping one part of our fundraising gala, and that is the tiny bird art. It's something we started a couple of years ago as a fun way to interact with artistic bog buddies, or folks who like just to make art in different mediums. Excuse me. This is a really awesome little sort of inlaid Blackburnian warbler. The fellow who makes these really spoils us. He usually gives us 4 or 5 every year. They're up on our website right now, I think. So if you went to the Sax-Zim.org, you'd be able to find information about the Tiny Bird Gala or the Tiny Bird art, see some of the pieces and do a silent auction and donate some money to them. And you might just come away with a cool piece like this, but a great way to, again, have a little fun as a fundraiser. And the last thing I'll mention about our winter season is the birding festival. This is not something that we as the Friends of Sax-Zim Bog put on. We are a supporting role in the festival. It's not happening this year. It is sort of spearheaded by the communities of Toivola and Meadowlands, the 2 tiny little towns up in the bog. They have a whole committee put this thing together. I'm in charge of usually getting the guides and planning the routes. Sparky usually gets a speaker and we submit maps and things like that to them, but otherwise it's the community. And it's a really fun thing to take groups of people from all over out to explore this place. It's a really fun thing. There's some folks who've been to every single one. This year would have been the 14th, I think. And so there's 1 or 2 people who've been to just about every one of them. So it's a really cool event and opportunity. But with all of these winter things, of course, we have to transition in the season. We have to end up in the spring after the winter. And spring for us, as you can see, mid-April to June, sort of like the winter. Sometimes April feels like spring. Sometimes it doesn't feel like spring until June. So it's a pretty long period. And being that we're at the southern edge of the boreal forest, the spring for us is when everything starts to come back. Most of the birds that are nesting in Minnesota generally, but also northeastern Minnesota, are neotropical migrants. They're birds that are heading to South America and then they're coming back. And they're coming back because of the food. All of the insect and all the bugs that wet, boggy habitats produce are really attractive and bring these birds back for a couple of months before they turn around and head back south. We have a really incredible mix of habitat types in the Sax-Zim Bog, which means we have a huge diversity of species that are around in our nesting. We'll talk about that in the next group of slides. But as birders, we think of migration, right? Spring migration in the bog is pretty hard, whether it's the spring or the fall. We have so much habitat that it's really hard to find one place to go. So certainly you can bird in the spring and have a successful spring in the Sax-Zim Bog. Most of the time, we're just waiting for birds to get back on breeding grounds before we start to find them. In northeastern Minnesota, migration is a long, extended, drawn-out thing. March to June is basically spring migration for us. In March, you have some birds that are wintering leaving, and then by June, usually everything gets back. Connecticut warblers and things might be on the late end of that, but everybody's back and nesting usually by June. And then, of course, I would be remiss to not talk about wildflowers. Usually about the second week of May is when we have a lot of our activities start up in the wildflower season. And like I said, by March, a lot of our northern breeders are going back. So birds like snowy owls and northern hawk owls. Snowies usually leave first, but the nice thing about migration and in a place like ours is that you often get birds that leave and then you get a whole nother suite of birds at rest before they head back north. So sometimes the snowy owls that have been around all winter, they might leave by the first week of March, but you might get a couple more that show up by the end of March that hang around for a couple days and then leave. Same thing with northern hawk owls and rough-legged hawks and shrikes, all of those birds too. Generally by the end of March, everything that has wintered has left. So our finches and things like that are usually gone by then. And March is a really exciting time for us because that's when we get most of our owls nesting. We were talking about great horned owls at the front. Great horns certainly are starting to think about nesting right now, even in northern Minnesota. But we do some owl surveys for the Western Great Lakes Rare Owl Monitoring Program. So we're looking for great grays and boreal owls mostly. Of course, we know great grays are here and nesting, so it's just a fun excuse to get out and do a survey. We have 3 different routes. This is a saw-whet owl. Saw-whet is one of the 5 species that nest in the bog. So we have saw-whets, long-eared owl, great horned, great gray, and barred owls. All of those nest. Like I said, occasionally we'll get a hawk owl that'll stick around and nest too, but usually we don't detect those on surveys because they're a day active owl. It's a pretty weird thing that gets missed on a nocturnal survey like this. Our warblers tend to show up relatively in order, so yellow rumps and birds like pine warblers showing up first generally, the hardier warblers. Typically for us in northeastern Minnesota, diversity peaks somewhere around the middle of May. 17th or so of May is usually species diversity. Usually by the 22nd or 23rd, everybody's going to be back. So you have representatives of the early clade, of those late birds, and then all the middle runners too. We'll talk warbler diversity in the summer slides. And then wildflowers, again, as a naturalist, I got to tell you about everything. So our wildflowers typically start about that second week of May, but things like skunk cabbage are really early. Sometimes you get skunk cabbage blooming, or poking its little flowers out of the snow even by the first week of May, sometimes as early as the last week of March. So they can be out when there's plenty of snow on the ground. A wonderful little plant, skunk cabbage is. We got tons of them in the bog. And our spring field trips. I will usually start field trips in May. We have one set that I'll talk about, which are our Warbler Wednesday field trips. So these field trips are every Wednesday, starting the second week in May, where we go out. Sparky takes a group, I take a group, and we see what we can find. Generally, we're going to do 80 to 100 species of bird. I usually spend mornings in the prairie bird section down in the agricultural areas looking for conch sparrow and bobolink and things like that. Sparky will take a group up on the north end right away to check for great grays and those sorts of birds, but we do hit all of the habitat types as much as we can to see as much as we can. Always a fun time. And like I said, this year, I don't know quite what we're going to do. Last year, we didn't have them. We might be able to do them this year. So stay tuned on the website to see when and if we are doing our Warbler Wednesdays, which would be a super cool thing to see if you're interested in birds generally. Whew, summertime. We're getting close. I'm going to take a quick sip here. Summer for me, like I said, is the interesting time. I am a naturalist. I like all sorts of things. And so for me, the summer is a great time. That's when most of our biodiversity is around. We have about 120 species that are nesting in the bog. That's our boreal species, as well as our deciduous forest species, with some prairie species, with some mixed forest birds. And most of the biodiversity, most of those 2,400 species that I mentioned, can really only be seen during this season, during the summer or the spring, the non-winter season. So if you're interested in orchids and butterflies and dragonflies, the summer is an incredible time to be in the bog. Like I said, we have some prairie birds that are nesting: the conch sparrow, sedge wren, bobolink, upland sandpiper, brewer's blackbird. All those birds nest in the bog in these agricultural areas. Some species like brewer's blackbird and upland sandpiper, they will also use bogs occasionally. The wide open sort of tundra type bogs get used by those species. We don't have a lot of that up here, so most of those birds we find in the agricultural areas along the south side of the bog. We also have magpies. I mentioned magpies again because I love corvids, but we also have the easternmost breeding population of black-billed magpie in the US in the Sax-Zim bog. So again, maybe if you spend some time out west, this is not an interesting bird, but for Minnesota, certainly it's a great bird. We do have them nesting in western Minnesota as well, but this is as far east as they go, again, in those agricultural type areas. Sandhill cranes, I put sandhill cranes in here because we generally have 5 to 6 pairs of sandhill cranes around during the summer. So if you like cranes generally, it's a great thing to look for. If you like seeing colts, even better. Oftentimes, once those colts start hatching and they're moving them around pastures to pasture, they'll stand in the middle of the road and just sort of look at you for a while, let the babies cross, and then they'll go across with them, which is kind of fun. But like I said, we have a huge diversity of habitats. We have birds like scarlet tanager nesting in the bog, birds like great-crested flycatcher and yellow-throated vireo, and wood thrush, birds that are maybe typically more of a southerly species. We have the right habitat for them, so we do have them. I mentioned wood thrush woods. That property has a great population of wood thrushes, has yellow-throated vireo and scarlet tanager, also some of our mixed forest warblers like black-throated green warbler, northern parula. all kinds of diversity. But because we have this really cool habitat, we get these really kind of southerly birds next to more northerly species like hermit thrushes or yellow-bellied flycatchers, some bog specialist species that are neotropical migrants, but they come here because we have what they want. We have what they're looking for. I love yellow-bellied flies. They're one of those hard birds in migration. All of our empids are for sure. But they're wonderful when we're stomping around looking for Connecticut warblers. That's one of those species that just sort of keeps pipping all around you, which is great. And like I said, I mentioned warblers. We do have about 21 species of warbler that nest in the bog. In northeastern Minnesota, that number is about 26 species of warbler. So you have these nice riverine birds like northern parula or black-throated green warbler, as well as the common stuff like yellow throats and yellow warblers. But golden wings get a lot of attention. Minnesota has most of the breeding golden wing warblers in the world. We have over 50% of the global population of golden wing warbler in Minnesota. We also have a ton of them in the bog. Last summer, one of our Welcome Center naturalists, Jason, did some surveys looking for breeding territories. And I think he had about 100 different males throughout that 147,000 acres of the Sax-Zim bog IBA, which is pretty cool. We have a lot of really interesting forest for these birds to be in, which is great. But our most visitors come for in the summer, of course, are Connecticut warblers. Connecticut's are those denizens of the tamarack and the black spruce bogs. Generally, if you want to see one, you got to put in a lot of work. You got to put on the mud boots and your bug spray, and you got to get into these bogs to find them. They're a wonderful skulky bird. Even when you think you found one, if you're hearing them sing, it can still take you quite a while to actually find them in the trees. They don't do a lot of flitting back and forth like a lot of warblers do. They do a lot of walking on the ground or up in the trees. So they're very difficult to see, generally speaking, but a wonderful, wonderful bird. And like I mentioned, those birds at the beginning, those winter species, great grays and Boreal Chickadee and Canada Jay and blackback woodpecker, all those things are here. They're here during the summer. Generally, at least half of the warbler Wednesdays will get a great gray, depending on where they're nesting in a year. But last couple of years, we've had about 2 of the 4 or 2 of the 5, 3 of the 5, somewhere in there. Of those field trips, we'll see one. So they are a bird you can find in the summertime, but it's a whole different place in the summer compared to the winter. And I mentioned orchids. We get about 21 species of orchid. Generally, that diversity picks up at the end of June, beginning of July. I usually do a field trip for orchids that last week of June, first week of July. That's usually when we have about peak diversity, or as close as we can get to it. We'll usually hit 8 to 9 species of orchid on that trip. If you're interested in butterflies, Sax-Zim bog is a great place with butterfly diversity. We have, I think we're close to 80 species, if we're not at 80. She's a butterfly in the Sax-Zim bog, ranging from really common things to very, very rare things. This is Dorcas copper. We have, I think, 3 or 4 species of copper in the bog. Dorcas being pretty rare, or getting rarer, I should say. We have really boreal forest specialties like Jetta Arctic. We have purplish fritillary, Freya fritillary. Some of these really northerly species come down south because we have the habitat. So they're here because we have what they need, where most of their range might be in Alaska or Canada, which is pretty cool. And the last bug I'll mention, of course, are our dragonflies and damselflies. St. Louis County has about 100 species of dragonfly and damselfly. The Sax-Zim bog has about 82 of that, I think, is what we're up to now. So most of the diversity of dragonflies and damselflies in the county can be found in this one place, which is really cool, really amazing. We have really nice populations of this group of dragonflies. This is an oscillated emerald, but the emeralds are really attractive to dragonfly people. If you know anybody, ask them about the Somatochlora emeralds. They'll probably get really excited. Northeastern Minnesota is probably the epicenter of Somatochlora diversity in the US. We have a number of species, most of that biodiversity in our Somatochlores in northeastern Minnesota, and we're happy to have a nice representation of those critters in the bog. And if you want to learn more about this, every year we do a BioBlitz. This will be the 9th consecutive bog BioBlitz. This one I think is in June the 17th. And we just, it's basically a set of field trips where you go out with an expert and you go out and find stuff and you document it. Generally, we'll have trips on butterflies and dragonflies, and we'll do 2 or 3 plant trips. I try to sneak in some insect field trips as well. I'll usually lead an aquatic plants or aquatic species field trip. But any sort of the natural world, we try to document. We've had trips on earthworms before. It's really cool. It's really a fun time. Last year, we were able to do it still, just in a sort of different way. But happy to answer BioBlitz questions if you've got them. The last season that we'll consider is the fall. The fall is, for me, sort of that refreshing season, getting ready for things to show up, getting ready for our winter season. I titled this section Fall Colors and Patience. Patience, because it's sort of a long time, seemingly, between birds showing up. Because migration's happening, you're getting excited about the winter, and then those winter birds don't show up until the end of November. From August can be a long time. So 2 distinct fall color seasons. If you're interested in visiting for fall colors, a lot of people do come to northeastern Minnesota for the fall colors. Generally, our deciduous tree diversity peaks in sometime in the 2nd to 3rd week of September, maybe later. And then tamaracks. I mentioned tamaracks, and I'll mention that in just a second why I mentioned this. Like I said, spring and fall migration, both tricky. Again, we just have a lot of habitat. It's hard to cover the whole place or give good suggestions about where to go. And November is when we see that northern group of species starting to show back. So like I said, deciduous trees, that color sort of starts somewhere around the 2nd, 3rd week of September. And then we get to tamarack season. And tamarack season is the best. When tamaracks change, you know something cool is happening out in the world. These golds that you see are just like aspens and birches. They just glow because there's so much tamarack in the bog. It's really great to see. Tamaracks are a deciduous conifer, so they do lose their needles every year, and they change to this really dramatic gold from their soft greens, which is just an absolutely cool thing to see. Moose, of course, it would be hard to talk about northern Minnesota and not talk about moose. The fall is usually the best time to come for moose. If you're interested in trying to see a moose, the fall, I would say, is the best time to try. That's when the cows and the young bulls and the mature bulls are moving around. So there's a lot of ground being covered every day. And we have some pretty nice habitat for them. I'm up in the bog a lot. I've never seen a moose. I've never seen a moose in Minnesota. So they aren't very easy to see. This one was right next to the Warren Nelson bog for like a month almost. I never saw her. Multiple people every day would see this moose, and I didn't see her. So they can be very, very tricky to see, even if you know where they're supposed to be. And then, like I said, the end of that month, end of November, is when our northern species start to show up. Typically, roughlegs and shrikes start to show up first. They can show up as early as the end of October, maybe even earlier sometimes, but those numbers really stick around until November, and then by December, they keep moving on. And then we get right back into our winter season. So I've given you a lot of information. I'm going to make that a little bit easier to digest here in these next few slides. Ultimately, everything I'm telling you is up to you to retain or also you to use. I can recommend a million different things to you, and I can totally cater it to what you're thinking of. But if we're just thinking generally, what do we think about visiting? Well, if you want to come in the winter, there's some pros, of course. It's a great time to find owls. It's a pretty reliable time to find woodpeckers and finches as well. You have great chances at seeing cool mammals when you visit during the wintertime. And it's really spectacular. The hoarfrost lately has been really good. You can see pictures of that from folks on our Facebook pages. Some of the cons, though, for a winter visit is that maybe there's not a lot of birds. And I say that with just an expectation to give you. You might get 20 species in a day, and that day might be 12 to 14 hours. You may just see 20 individual birds in that 12 to 14 hours. But most of them are going to be really cool. You're going to get great gray and northern hawk owl and 5 or 6 species of finch. It's going to be a really cool day. It's just going to be very, very long. If you're not comfortable in cold weather or winter driving, this might not be a great time to visit. For the last couple of years, we've had the coldest location in the lower 48. So something to consider, hitting negative 40s to 50s with wind chill hitting negative 70. So it's very cold sometimes. There's no heated outhouses, and I say that with a smile because boy, we get a lot of different reactions about outhouses. But that's the bathrooms that we have in the area. There's not very many of them. Mary Lou at her feeders, she does have an outhouse that is heated. So if you do want a heated outhouse, there's one. in the whole bog. So something to consider as well. And sometimes it can just be too busy for some folks. And I totally understand that as well. If you're thinking about coming in the summer, pros about a summer visit, that the biodiversity is at its peak. If you want to see a lot of birds, if you want to see a lot of different critters, summer's a great time to come. There's a lot of species that you can see in the summertime that you can also find in the winter. It's just a little harder to find them. I say bugs in both columns. If you see that, bugs with an exclamation point and bugs with a question mark. Bugs are really cool. There's a lot of them, but some people don't like those bugs, the mosquitoes and the black flies and the horse flies and things. Totally understand that. Generally, there's also fewer in the summer. Some of the cons about the summer, of course, bugs being the biting bugs, harder to find some of these species, and there's a lot of ear birding. The foliage gets pretty dense, and so sometimes that's the birding you do. You got to listen before you can go in and find something. So that can make it trickier for some folks too. And ultimately, it's up to you. Whenever you come, enjoy it, because it's a really incredible place. The biodiversity is incredible. The species you see in the winter and in the summer are incredible. It's just a cool place to be if you've never been before. If you have, I would challenge you to come in a season you've never been before, to see what's going on in those different parts of the year. And with that, that's what I've got. I'm ready for questions. I'm going to leave this last slide up too. So if you are interested in learning a little more, our website is the sax-zim.org. You can learn all about the organization. There's a whole bunch of different stuff you can see there. If you have any specific questions for this talk or beyond, let me know. Mail is right there, Naturalist at Sax-Zim. We have a Facebook group and we have a Facebook organization page. It's kind of confusing, but you can find both of those. And if you really want to dig in and learn some cool stuff, the bog place to go. On our website, you can find the link to this. Every year after the BioBlitz, I do a report. Every year after our kestrel monitoring season, I do a report as well. So it's a great place again to learn more about this area. So I'm going to let you all figure out your questions, type them all in. I see we've got some busy things popping up on the little chat bar. So if you have questions, I'm going to get them, and we'll work through a few of these questions before I go. Sound good?
Okay, thank you, Clinton. Can you see the questions on the chat?
I can, absolutely.
Okay, good, very good. So maybe you want to start with a few of those.
Yeah, totally. So at the top, of course, any tips on finding great grays? Yes, absolutely. Part of it is timing, and that can be the trickiest for folks to nail down when to show up, right? They're not a day active bird. They really stop being active in the mornings around 9 or 10 o'clock. So just as you get enough sun to sort of show them off so the ravens can start finding them and things like that, then they tend to go back in the woods. Cloudy days are always a really good day to come looking for them because they tend to be a little active, a little bit more, a little bit longer rather. Usually if I'm guiding folks, I usually try to get to the bog about sunup. So that's when I would arrive. In the evenings, stay as late as you can see. I usually target them starting right as soon as the sky starts to change color. If you're still there by then, that's like getting ready to be prime time. So that's what I would say. Be patient, of course, when you're finding them. They don't tend to perch up very high. So they tend to perch that 10 to 20 foot range in the trees. They also tend to like dead conifers. They're the same color as those trees though, so they're really difficult to see. But look for those bow tie marks, those white throat marks. That shows up even if you can't see the whole bird. You can usually see those marks as well. Great question about temperature. Very good question. I'm not sure what we're looking at for averages. If I can give you a typical sort of range, January usually is our coldest month. So that's usually when we start to see those temperatures in the negative 20s or 30s. That's pretty uncommon lately, unfortunately, and we really need it to get that cold for some of these invasive species that we have. In the spring, it can still be very cold down into the 30s, even in May. Usually you want to bring layers in the spring. Usually you want to bring layers in the winter time too. We usually don't get warmer than 80 or 90 when we're up in the bog. Down by the lake here in Duluth, that of course changes. We don't really get more than 75 degrees or so. So it is still fairly cool up here in the summertime as well. Thank you for that question. Let me see. Record number of species we've had on a BioBlitz. Great question. That was probably last year. So the format last year was a little bit different. So we extended it to like 3 or 4 days. We didn't have the field trips, but we encouraged folks to go out. We hit 730 species that day, which is about a quarter of the biodiversity we had documented at that point. Usually somewhere around 400 to 500 species get documented during a BioBlitz, just pretty regularly in a typical BioBlitz. And of those, somewhere around 85 to 90 are new for the list, are new for the master species list, which is really cool. And part of the reason we have these BioBlitzes, get really targeted surveys of stuff from the experts, which is really cool. So great question. Question about pitcher plants and sundews. Do we have them? Absolutely. We don't have a ton of pitcher plants. Because our bogs tend to be closed. So our bogs have full treed canopy, which means we don't tend to have a lot of pitcher plants. We do have them. Same thing with sundews. We just don't have a lot of the best habitat for those two. But where they are, they're there in abundance. Totally. Question about rough-legged hawk peaks. Did we have peak rough-leg numbers this fall? No, which is a big surprise. A little background. We're going to do a little background tangent and come right back to this question. This fall at Hawk Ridge, I've worked for Hawk Ridge for a couple of years in the first years of this Sax-Zim position. And so this year, Hawk Ridge demolished their record for rough-legged hawks. They almost beat it by 1,000 birds, which is incredible. We did not see the same numbers of rough-legged hawks in the bog this fall. 2 falls ago, we did. I had almost 100 rough-legged hawks in a day a couple of years ago, where we didn't have a record flight at Hawk Ridge. So it's very interesting about rough leg numbers and when you can see them. It's a good question. I'm happy to clarify more. If you send me an email about rough legs, I could talk about them all day. I love them. Owl eruptions this year, and any idea when the next great gray eruption is expected? So super question. Generally speaking, with our eruptions, we don't see a lot of the great gray eruptions. And I say that with an asterisk, of course. Most of the great grays that we see in the bog are resident. So all those birds that you see on Admiral and McDavitt Road, those birds nest there. Generally, when we have eruption years, we don't see a huge influx, maybe 3, 4, 5 new birds. They always show up in weird habitats. That's how we can kind of tell that they're not a resident. They came somewhere else. There is a little bit of an owl eruption this year, especially along the North Shore. There have been a number of great grays in places that they aren't typically. So I do the 2 Harbors Christmas bird count just up the shore. We had 7 great grays on that count, which is pretty odd because we're nowhere near really nice great gray habitat. Generally with great gray eruptions, the big one that happened in 2004 and 5, that's pretty unprecedented, that level of a flight. They are really irregular in their eruption schedule, so 8 to 12 years. It's a pretty long period for great grays, but super good questionnaire. Gear for biting insects. I love this question. Generally, it's long sleeves, long pants. If you're comfortable with sort of lightweight long sleeves and long pants, great. Bug spray then is for your hands. That's really all you really need covered. I would really recommend kind of a head net. They're incredibly valuable to have. I use them a lot. It's harder to use binoculars and things, but that's a great way to combat them. DEET, of course, is good. We have ticks. We usually don't have to worry too much about ticks, though, on visits. Great question. Another cool owl question about boreal owls. Have they been around? Boreal owls are a northern Minnesota nester. They're typically an eruptive species when you see them. We usually will get a couple in the bog if we have an eruption. They're a 4-year bird, so they erupt every 4 years or so. This year, they're certainly not in the bog. And the one last year was sort of an anomaly too, where it was outside of an eruption year and it was just one individual. So none around this year, and that's pretty expected. 2022, I think, is the next boreal eruption. 22, somewhere in there. And let's check some more questions. Kestrel monitoring question. I will give you a couple of places back for kestrel monitoring. So I did a presentation for the Minnesota Ornithologists Union paper sessions. That's on their YouTube page. So if you typed in Minnesota Ornithologists Union, you can see the talk I did about the kestrel monitoring. I'll refer you to that so I can answer a few more of these questions. But generally, we have a pretty big program. We have almost 50 boxes. It's a pretty incredible thing. Demographics and the ages of participants of trips generally tends to be, of course, on the older end. That's not unexpected in some of this, but we certainly do get folks that are younger because of the things that I can cover with programming. So I can talk about very specific things that might draw a very specific audience that might be a little bit younger, but I try to be as general as I can. I try to teach you something and maybe get some more exciting observations too for some folks too. So it varies, generally skewing a little bit older. Great question there. Okay, let's see. So a rail question. I love rails. See black rail? No. Our only record of black rail in Minnesota, one of our two, I think, are kind of suspect. The first record certainly was, I think they went back and reviewed it and was not accepted. Yellow rails maybe is what you're asking about more specifically. Black rails is definitely a southern bird in the US. Yellow rails do not nest in the bog anymore. They used to. It's been since the late 90s since we've had yellow rails at all in the bog, but certainly a species that is in northern Minnesota for sure. Land questions, good. These are the last two, and I think then we'll end it there. So who owns the land in the bog? So it's a great question. We, like I said, own about 500 acres. All of the rest of it is through private ownership, whether that's folks who live there or farm there. Whether that's through companies like the paper company or the railroads or something like that. The state owns quite a bit of land in the area, and then there's a whole big chunk of land that is not owned by anybody. The state or the county oversees it, and that would be tax forfeit properties. So properties that were owned by somebody and have just sort of disappeared into the county's auspices. That's a lot of the land we actually buy is tax forfeit land that nobody really owns. So there's a whole huge diversity. Again, that 147,000 acres isn't acknowledging an ownership of anybody. It's just saying this is a cool area to see. So ownership is totally varied and totally mixed. Great question. And the last question, who to contact about land acquisition for conservation? That's a great question. I would send you to, you could email me and I could direct you to the people you need to talk to, but there's a couple of ways you can do it too. We have a land fund. So we have a donation fund called Acres for Owls. And that is sort of a big pot of funding that you can earmark donations to. So if you donate $25 to be a member, you can say, I want my $25 to go to Acres for Owls. I want it to go to education. I want it to just be generally used. So you can earmark donations specifically to land conservation, or you can send an email to Sarah at info@saxzim.org. So info@saxzim. Our development director, Sarah, she'd be able to help you out with that as well. And yeah, it's really wonderful that we have, again, membership-based folks who are always willing to help us out with land conservation. We have a couple of projects going on right now too, if you're interested, but that's all I'll say for now. And I'll say thanks everybody for sticking around, for paying attention, and for asking these great questions. I'm happy to answer more. Like I said, my email's right there, naturalist@Sax-Zim, if you've got them. So thanks, you guys.
Thank you for your marathon talk.
You're very welcome.
Awesome.
I think that I can hear everybody clapping, even though
oh, thanks.
it was a wonderful presentation. I'm ready to go up there. It's like going to a different country with all those different birds that we don't see. And I was surprised to see so many different ones that I have not seen. So that would be a wonderful trip, and I'm sure I will be up there, and others will too. So I think everybody really enjoyed it. Really appreciate your presentation.
Thanks,
bogs are fun. We have some bogs around here, and so it's a good comparison. That's why some of those questions.
Totally.
But thank you so much to everybody who came too. Our 93 or 94 people who came on to hear you.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thanks, Clinton.
Bye, Clinton.
Bye,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Wow, 94.
That's amazing.
Cool.
Yeah, we quite a few there.